130,000 troops are massed on Ukraine's border. The United States has warned a Russian invasion is happening this week. Politicians have been trying to talk Russian President Vladimir Putin back from the brink. World War III might happen a lot sooner than we think. Here's where we are, but how did we get here? Welcome to Here and How, where we try to explain just what the hell is going on in the world. Today we're looking at Russia's near imminent invasion of Ukraine and how it could trigger World War III. Ukraine is a country of 44 million people in Eastern Europe. It's a former Soviet republic that became independent in 1991, but for most of its history before then, it was closely tied to Russia. That puts it in a weird position. The country is independent and westernized, but also has long-standing cultural and societal connections to Russia. Many people speak both Ukrainian and Russian in Ukraine, particularly in the east of the country, which borders Russia. And Vladimir Putin himself has said that Russians and Ukrainians are one nation. But Ukraine wants to see itself as a global player, away from Russian control. It's tried in the last 30 years to become a member of the European Union, a group of 27 European countries that work together on trade and standards, and of NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. That first bit, membership of the European Union, is what pissed off Russia back in 2014. Vladimir Putin didn't like the idea of losing his sphere of influence over former Soviet Union members in Eastern Europe. There are many reasons for that, but a major one is that he's a former KGB spy who longs to return Russia to the position of power it had in the Soviet Union era. So he invaded eastern and southern Ukraine, managing to capture an area called Crimea and constantly destabilizing areas of Eastern Europe. Russia has even handed out Russian passports to East Ukrainian citizens in the Donbas region to try and stake its territorial claim. So for the last 8 years, Ukraine has been in a no man's land. It's technically independent, but lost large parts of its country to Russia. It's lived under the constant threat of invasion from one of the world's superpowers, and it became scared, so it sought protection from NATO. NATO is an organization made up of Western countries to try and guarantee the freedom and security of its members through political and military means. You can see why Ukraine would want to join it, and you can probably see why Russia doesn't want Ukraine to join it. For us, it's absolutely mandatory to ensure Ukraine never, ever becomes a member of NATO, said Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov. Putin has said he worries if Ukraine joins NATO, as NATO would likely recapture Crimea from Russia. That's been a long-standing worry of Putin and Russia ever since it invaded parts of Ukraine in 2014. So why has Putin chosen now to threaten to invade? There are a bunch of different reasons. Putin might have seen the chaos from the US pullout of Afghanistan in 2021 and realized that the appetite for war in the West is far lower than he thought, which is dangerous and horrifying for the Russian and Ukrainian people. World leaders are also focused on the coronavirus crisis, trying to stop the spread of a deadly pandemic. And in Europe, major leaders who would ordinarily be expected to rally support to stop an invasion are weakened. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson is facing a scandal of his own. French President Emmanuel Macron is fighting for re-election and seeking peace as a result. And Germany, the third big power in Europe, just got a new leader, Olaf Scholz, who replaced Angela Merkel, seen as the strong woman of Europe, and put a thorn in Putin's side. All of that adds up to a deadly calculation. Act now while the West is weak, and Russia can potentially expand its territory. It can bring Ukraine back into the fold after more than 30 years apart. It makes Vladimir Putin, who has a stranglehold on power, but isn't always popular with his people, look good to the public. It would also help delay the threat Russia sees from the West encircling its borders. Part of the reason Russia has ratcheted up tensions on Ukraine's borders is it feels it's under threat from NATO. In reality, that's not true. Russia is a global superpower that the West doesn't want to invade, but does want to diminish, for precisely this kind of reason. Yet Putin believes he can justify action now by playing the victim. It's also a win-win situation for Putin. If he does invade, then he potentially gains more ground in Europe and can try to return Russia to what he sees as its Soviet Union glory days. If he doesn't, he's likely to be able to get concessions from the West for standing down his troops. Russia and Ukraine signed a 2015 peace deal that gave lots of power to Russia in the east of Ukraine. Russia believes Ukraine hasn't held up its end of the bargain. The bigger goal, though, is to stop Ukraine from joining NATO. We will not allow anyone to slam close NATO's open door policy, US Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman has said. But Ukraine's leaders have said they'd be willing to delay joining the organization if it brought about peace. And with 130,000 Russian troops, tanks, and armored vehicles on its border, peace is what Ukraine wants. It's also what everyone else wants too. The Pentagon has put 8,500 troops on alert and is deploying 3,000 extra soldiers to Germany, Romania, and Poland. Thousands more from NATO member countries are massed on Ukraine's western borders, ready to help their ally if needed. It's a giant game of chicken, and the closest we've come to war between superpowers in 60 years, since the Cuban Missile Crisis that almost started the last World War III. That war, which would have been fought in 1962, would have ended quickly. Back then, both the US and Russia were nuclear-armed states and willing to use their weapons. That's not likely now. War has changed, but it's no less destructive. Rather than a surgical strike, World War III will likely start with cyber attacks, airstrikes on cities like Kiev, and then a ground invasion. It won't be clean-cut and decisive either. Russia is an expert at what's called asymmetrical warfare, bringing things down to the dirt, using cheap tricks to destabilize a country. If Russian boots end up on Ukrainian territory, that's what we should expect. An uneasy tension and constant snipping and shifting designed to keep the West uneasy. It put the world in a less safe place and emboldened Putin to try the same trick in other Soviet Union states. And for the people of Ukraine, it'd mean a loss of their freedom. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and follow if you want to see more news dives. We have a lot in store, but please let us know what you want us to cover in the comments below. For now, here's where we are today, and this is how we got here.